All right, welcome back everybody to another deep dive. Today we're talking about something that I think is very important for a lot of parents out there. Resilience in children.
Yes.
And we have this source here called Pasted Text that's got a lot of really good questions in it. And we are going to dive deep into them. So let's jump right in. What does it even mean for a kid to be resilient? What are we even talking about here?
That is the question, isn't it? And I think a lot of times people will use the phrase bounce back, and that's kind of a simplistic way to look at it. I see resilience as more of a, like a muscle that we build. It's about equipping our children with the skills and the mindset that they need to not only survive challenges, but to actually grow from those challenges. And we know from research that children who are resilient, they have a more optimistic outlook. They're going to be better problem solvers, and they're also going to have stronger social connection.
Right, so it's not just about protecting them from all these things that life throws at them, but it's actually giving them the tools to be able to handle it.
Right. And it's tough because one of the questions that I thought was really interesting in Pasted Text was, how do we balance this, right? How do we balance nurturing our kids and wanting to protect them, but at the same time allowing them to fail? Because failure is part of it.
Yeah, it's a very delicate balance, you
Yeah.
know. I think the key here is we don't want to be completely hands-off, but we want to be supportive guides. So, for example, if your child is working on a puzzle and they're struggling with it, instead of just jumping in and, fixing it for them and showing them how to do it, maybe you ask a question like, well, what have you tried so far? Or what could you try differently? So that way they can come to the solution on their own. You're fostering a sense of agency, right? That agency thing.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. And speaking of fostering things, there was another thing in Pasted Text that I thought was kind of interesting. It talked about some of the key traits of resilient children. And one of them was managing stress effectively. Now, how do you even explain that to a kid? What does that look like?
Well, that's going to look different depending on how old your child is. So for a 5-year-old, teaching them how to take deep breaths when they're feeling overwhelmed, having a designated calm down corner, that might be really helpful. Teenagers, on the other hand, that might look like journaling or going for a run. Things like that could even be mindfulness exercises. Whatever it is, it's really important that we give them that toolbox, those coping mechanisms that they need. And of course, we as parents are modeling those healthy coping strategies.
It all comes back to that.
Right.
It all comes back to, do as I do, not do as I say. And I think that kind of leads perfectly into the next thing from Pasted Text, which was this question about storytelling, which I find fascinating. It said, how can storytelling be used as a tool? How can we do that to build resilience in children?
I'm so glad you brought this up because stories are so powerful. Children, when they hear stories about characters overcoming different obstacles, it helps them to develop empathy and to realize that, they're not alone in facing these challenges. And there was a study that was done by, oh gosh, what was his name? I can't remember his name right now. It doesn't matter, but it was at university in him. And they found that children who were exposed to stories about resilience, they actually showed greater emotional regulation and problem-solving skills in their everyday lives.
Yeah.
So it's like giving them a mental rehearsal for how to handle their own challenge.
That's like planting those seeds
Right.
of possibility
Yeah.
through narrative. And it's not just fictional stories.
Right.
We can tell them stories about ourselves. Like, I remember when I was a kid, I was terrified to ride my bike without training wheels. And my dad told me this story about how many times he fell off his bike learning to ride his bike. And for some reason, that made me feel better.
Exactly. It makes it real,
It makes it relatable.
It's not so intimidating.
Yeah. So Pasted Text also had this question about this idea of a growth mindset.
Yes.
What is a growth mindset?
So a growth mindset, basically it's a belief that our abilities and our intelligence are not fixed. They can be developed through hard work and effort and learning. It's the opposite of having a fixed mindset, where you believe you're either good at something or you're not, and that's it. And when we encourage a growth mindset in our kids, we're teaching them that they can improve their skills through practice and perseverance. So instead of saying, oh, you're so smart to your child, you could say, wow, look at how much effort you put into that. You really stuck with it, even when it got tough.
So it's more about the process than the result, right?
Exactly. It's focusing on the process rather than just the outcome.
And that can have a huge impact on
Yeah.
whether or not they were willing to even try something.
Right, because they don't look at setbacks as failures. They look at them as opportunities for growth.
This has been a really great conversation. I think we've covered a lot of really good stuff here.
I agree.
We talked about defining what resilience even is, this balance between supporting our kids and letting them fail, the power of storytelling, and the growth mindset.
It's a lot. But I think the key takeaway here is that Resilience is not something that people are born with. It's a skill, and it can be learned and nurtured. And we as parents have such an important role in helping our children to develop this skill.
We do. And something that was really interesting in Paste and Text that I wanted to bring up here at the end was it's not just about the individual traits,
That's right. It's also about the environment.
right? So are we creating supportive environments where our kids feel safe to take risks and learn from their mistakes? I think that's a really good question
It really is.
for all of us to think about.
And I think that's a question for our listeners to think about as well. How can we, in our own individual ways, help to create a more resilient world for our children? What steps can we take, whether they're big or small, to create those supportive spaces that children need?
It takes a village.
It does.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you next time.
See you later. Bye.